Okay, so yesterday was finally the kickoff of the coup in Venezuela. Guaido's planned uprising and supposed final push to achieve control of the government in that country came a day early. Apparently, he was planning to do this on May Day so that it could have a little more left-wing credibility. But on all likelihood, the Maduro government was probably planning countermeasures for this day, so Guaido decided to go ahead with the operation a day early. Now, from what I understand, that did have its costs and its benefits, because while he may have been able to better catch the government off guard, apparently there were a lot of soldiers who had agreed to ally with Guaido and participate in this coup, who did not decide to go along with it once it was decided to go a day early. Now, I must say that yesterday was far more quiet than I would have expected of this sort of an operation. It seemed to me that Guaido was only able to muster a few troops, and that the Maduro government was not really willing to commit a particularly large military force to countering them. The Guaido allied soldiers were denoted by a blue armband that they were wearing, and other than the group of soldiers who were directly guarding Guaido and one other group, I did not really see a whole lot of Guaido allied soldiers, at least coming out from the pictures that we got. Now, unfortunately, the Maduro government heavily restricted the media yesterday. It was very tough for many people to post on social media, and of course, BBC International, CNN International, and the Radio Caracas were all shut down for the day. So perhaps there were more troops that we just simply didn't see that were allied with Guaido. For the most part, though, we did see a very big group of civilian protesters who were coming out to support Guaido, but unfortunately they were not very well armed. Most of the clashes that we were seeing were between large groups of protesters and Maduro government soldiers. Now, there were some colectivos that came out. Colectivos, of course, are the pro-Maduro militia. Apparently, some Guaido supporters attempted to occupy the Ministry of Transportation and claim it in the name of Guaido's administration. However, some colectivos decided to hold themselves up in the parking garage and not allow any Guaido supporters to enter. Now, interestingly enough, the Caracas police decided to intervene here because the colectivos were an extrajudicial gang, so the police intervened to try and kick the colectivos out. Now, I don't necessarily think that this means that the police were on the side of Guaido or anything. It looked to me like the police were could simply have just been doing their job and trying to maintain the peace. Because these same police officers we did not see interfering in the main protests and trying to actively support Guaido's fans. Their involvement in the situation was strictly limited to this whole incident at the Ministry of Transportation. So after all this hubbub in the streets, Maduro came out and gave a speech on TV last night claiming that there was an attempted coup and that he had successfully thwarted it and that everything was good and dandy now. Now, it's important for Maduro to claim a total victory in this case because he doesn't want his supporters or those who don't support him to lose confidence in his hegemony in the country. He can't be allowed to look weak because he is, of course, the leader. So in that case, we can't necessarily take his word to mean a whole lot. However, from what I saw yesterday, I simply, and again, we didn't get as much footage out as perhaps we might have wanted because of the social media censorship, but it doesn't look like that there was a massive defeat for Maduro or anything. I just simply did not see that many troops. The only serious conflict we saw was at La Carlota Air Force Base, which apparently the Guaido people claim that they captured. Maduro says this absolutely isn't true, although I think I kind of side with the Guaido people on that one. The place was set on fire, and then later on in the day, Guaido did give a speech from there. So it looks like that they captured it at least for some time now. Who knows? Maduro's people may have taken it back later. But this whole operation is playing out quite awkwardly, if you ask me. I mean, there was a video of the protesters going to this Air Force base, and they were basically shaking the fence and rattling it, and eventually they were able to topple it over. They toppled down the fence, and then they started walking onto the base, and you could see the troops. There was a video taken from the troops' side and you could see their faces, and they were rather alarmed, and they were trying to tell people like, hey, just get off, hey, don't come here, don't pick a fight, please, and they didn't seem like they were ready to shoot civilians. They didn't have their guns up or anything. They were just like waving at them like, hey, get out of here, don't make us have to use force or anything, we get that you're trying to do your thing, and we don't want any part of it. And while these troops being videoed were not pro-Guaido, they certainly didn't seem to be virulently pro-Maduro. But all in all, it doesn't look like much was changed yesterday. Guaido is still not in the presidential palace. His people are still not occupying the cabinet. The defense minister has not switched sides and joined him. And really, as long as Maduro holds a pretty decent sway over the military, Guaido cannot take power. What they really needed was for a significant portion of the military to switch sides yesterday, and that just didn't seem to occur. Now, Guaido also gave his wrap-up speech last night. Of course, his was delivered over the internet from an undisclosed location, and he, of course, called for more protests on May Day, which is today. And he most certainly did not admit defeat. He did not at all concede the notion that Maduro had defeated the coup. However, he did implicitly admit that he did not have the support of the military because he called on the military to abandon Maduro, which he's been doing for quite some time. Frankly, it would seem that the U.S. only backed Guaido because he had assured them that if he proclaimed himself president, that the military would pretty easily switch over. Now, to me, knowing at least a rather basic history of the Bolivarian regime in Venezuela, that didn't seem all that obvious, considering that Chavez himself was a man out of the military and had attempted 2 military coups against the elected government before being elected himself. I would imagine that the military probably was pretty pro-Maduro, considering that Maduro was Chavez's chosen successor. But the U.S. apparently was sufficiently convinced that the military would switch sides to Guaido, and so they went ahead and backed him, but now they kind of can't back down. So their only option is to keep begging the military to please support Guaido. And interestingly enough, John Bolton came out yesterday, and he specifically named the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Venezuela and the defense minister, saying that they had agreed to take part in the coup and were not, and simply had reneged on their obligation. So Bolton said, of course, well, there's still time for you guys to switch places, and you really should come over to our side because we're going to win. And, of course, Bolton knows that they need the defense minister since the defense minister is the man over top of the whole military. With the defense minister on your side, you should have he should be able to get enough of the military to come over and support Guaido and thus oust Maduro. But as of last night, the defense minister is still pro-Maduro. Getting called out by John Bolton apparently did not sway him. Now, another interesting of this whole quirky operation is that the U.S. is putting a lot of blame on Cuba for some reason. Apparently, they seem to think that Cuba is propping up Maduro, which is kind of rich, considering that the story was for many years that oil-rich Venezuela was propping up Castro's Cuba. So I'm not exactly sure how that works. I mean, Bolton kind of implied that the Venezuelan military is being held hostage by Cuban advisors. I don't really get how that works. He said that the Venezuelan military was afraid to switch sides to Guaido because there were 20,000 Cuban troops in the country that could take out the entire Venezuelan military. I'm not exactly sure how that works. Now, perhaps this whole idea of blaming Cuba is just supposed to create an excuse for the U.S. to invade Cuba after Venezuela falls to Guaido. Bolton did again invoke his sort of triple axis of evil, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, as sort of the enemies of America. So it does seem that he's still intent on trying to overthrow the regimes in those two countries as well as Venezuela. Now, the most interesting thing, but probably untrue, statement that came out of yesterday was from Mike Pompeo, who is, hey, if anybody's a lizard person, I'm not a believer in the lizard person conspiracy, but if anybody's a lizard person, it's Mike Pompeo. Now, he went on with Wolf Blitzer, or as Ben Carson calls him, Wolf, and he said, hey, Wolf, this is the way it is. Maduro was going to leave. He saw the writing on the wall. He could see that there was this massive uprising against him and that he had no support, and he was ready to leave. His plane was on the tarmac. They were warming up the engines. They were about to take off, and he was going to fly and live in Cuba for the rest of his life. But then Putin called him. That dastardly Russian boy, Vladimir. He called up Maduro, and he said, "You know what, Nicky? This ain't the time to go. This is the time to stay and fight, and you can do this, and I believe in you." And based on Putin's words alone, Maduro was inspired not to retreat, not to flee to Cuba and live a very nice life on the beach. No, instead, Putin convinced him to stand and fight for what he believes in. Now, is this true? Maybe, but frankly, based on what I saw yesterday, I don't really see why Maduro would try and flee. Yes, there were a lot of civilians out, and I will give him that. It was a massive protest from Maduro's supporters, but again, this was just in the capital. We didn't see great pictures out of the rest of the country, and from what I understand, Maduro's base of support is in the countryside, with the rural people. So, I mean, I can't be that shocked that you could get a huge uprising of people in Caracas against Maduro. Now, perhaps I'm misunderstanding the situation, and Maduro's base of support really is in Caracas and perhaps the other major cities. But if I think of it in the context of American politics, could I imagine there being a protest this massive in, say, New York or LA against Donald Trump? Absolutely, because the cities did not vote for Trump at all, so it wouldn't be shocking that you could get that many people who were virulently opposed to him. So likewise, I don't think that Maduro has much reason to believe that his base of support's been eroded. And like I said, it certainly doesn't look like that the military has crossed over and joined Guaido, and that's really the only reason to give up power, because the guy who's got power is whoever has all the guns. Guaido doesn't have a lot of guns. Now, interestingly, the guns that Guaido's people do have appear to be supplied by the U.S. This is pretty obvious considering that Venezuela is a country that has completely armed their armed forces with, Russian guns. They have AKs and such. The Guaido's people, rather conspicuously, were all armed with ARs, including one man who had an AR-57, which is a very odd variant. It's not something that you see every day. It's an AR chambered in 5.7 by 28, and if you're looking at the video screen, it's the guy on the left in the picture with the camo rifle. Yeah, those guns are made in Washington State, and to my knowledge, there's nothing else like them made anywhere else in the world. And they don't sell a ton of them. And to my knowledge, they've certainly never sold any to the Venezuelan military. So it would seem as though that Guaido is receiving at least some arms from the United States. But we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens today. I will be watching this quite closely, and if anything significant happens, I guess I'll have a follow-up video on this tomorrow. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.